It's always a great pleasure to be with you. This is Michael Williams, founder of the Start Speaking Training Center. And today, we are going to look at the second part of the real deal about stammering and stuttering. The real deal. If you haven't had a chance to watch the first part, I want to strongly encourage you to go watch the first part of the real deal about stammering and stuttering. Why? Because there's some detours, some obstacles, some roadblocks that you're going to face, if you haven't already faced them, that prevent many people from actually learning to speak well, right? And these are detours in the way we think and detours in the things that we do in our behaviors. So it's not just about what we do, and it's not just about what we think. It's about both of those things. And you really need to know what those detours are, because if you're watching this video, it's probably because you want and need to get to a place where you're speaking well, where you are able to say what you want to say, where you're able to give presentations, where you're able to say your name, where you're able to order, where you're able to do the things that you know that you're capable of doing, and you're able to express yourself, right? You're watching this because you want and you need to be able to get there. But these detours are the very things that keep most people from getting to that place. So you really need to watch that video. Please watch the first video, the real deal. What I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to prove to you, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that in fact you can speak more smoothly, more fluently, and more confidently, no matter how severe the stuttering may be. But there's two qualifying questions that I'm going to ask you in just a moment. So, let me repeat that. No matter how severe the stuttering may be, you can speak extremely well, right? Not instantly, it's a process, but you can get there. Doesn't matter, you can get there, but let me ask you these two questions first, right? So I want you to answer these two questions. The first question is, do you stutter 100% of the time in 100% of the situations? Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, in every conceivable situation in your life, at home, by yourself, on the phone, with your parents, with your friends, with your siblings, at work, when you're ordering food, in any conceivable situation, in every, not just any, in every conceivable situation, do you stutter? Okay. Now, do you stutter 100% of the time? That's every time you open your mouth, you stutter. You can't say a letter or a word without stutter. If you don't stutter 100% of the time, that's every time you open your mouth, you stutter. If that's not true, then we can check this off. If it's also not true that in every situation, I'm talking about every situation you can think about, you stutter. If that's not true, we can check this off. Now, there may be some people who, in certain situations, they stutter close to 100% of the time, right? But that's not 100% of the situations. All aspects of every area of your life, all the time you stutter. Right? Most people are not there. Virtually no one's there. If these two things are true, then we can move to the next part. Now, who might these two things be true for? Someone that has a damaged part of their brain that affects their speech in such a way that they actually stutter, right? Where there's a damaged part so that 100% of the time, 100% of the situations, they're going to stutter. This program would not work for that kind of a person. But I'm going to say virtually everyone watching this, probably could say, no, I don't stutter 100% of the time in 100% of the situations. Virtually everyone watching this could probably say that, right? All right. What's the second one? Second one is, can you learn new skills and abilities? And can you develop new habits? Okay, so let's take a look at these. Have you ever learned a new skill or a new ability? Do you know how to type? Have you ever learned a computer program or a computer game? Do you play an instrument or more than one instrument? Do you know more than one language? Many of my clients, if not most of my clients, know at least 2 languages. So the answer is absolutely yes, right? So the question is, can you learn new skills and new abilities, like a second language? Doesn't matter if you are going to be fluent at it. I'm just asking, could you learn a second language? Could you learn how to say hello? Could you learn how to say, where's the bathroom? Could you learn how to carry a small conversation eventually? If you study and if you practice, could you learn? Could you learn how to type? Could you learn how to play the piano? Could you learn how to play the violin? Could you learn how to tie your shoes or drive, right? Virtually everyone, if you're watching this, you're probably going to have to say what? Yes, Michael, I have learned and I can continue to learn new skills and abilities. Now, as we get older, sometimes it takes a little longer, it may be a little more difficult, but we can still learn, right? So you're probably going to have to say yes to this. Can you develop new habits, both good and bad? There's been studies done that even people with certain areas of their brains have been damaged, they're still able to develop new habits, things that they do automatically without thinking. Can you develop new habits? Well, what about tying your shoe? You don't have to think really about tying your shoe anymore. What about walking? You have to think about walking anymore. Certain things that you do around your house, you don't think about it anymore, right? Even as far as speech, there's certain things you don't think about anymore as far as speaking. Sometimes even with driving, have you ever just, you're driving to a place that you go to every day and now it's become a habit. You just know how to get there. You don't really have to think about it. Even driving itself or riding a bike. You don't have to think about how to balance or how to gauge the distance between you and the next car or how much pressure to put on the brake or the gas. You just do it what? Automatically. Habits. Can you develop new habits? I think virtually everyone will have to say yes. Even people with parts of their brains that's been damaged can develop, depending on the parts, new habits. And we're going to talk about that a little more. So, if you said yes, I can learn new skills and abilities. Yes, I can develop new habits. No, I don't stutter 100% of the time in 100% of the situations. Right? Then guess what? You can speak well. You can speak extremely well. You can learn to speak smoothly, fluently, and confidently, no matter how severe the stuttering is. No matter how severe it is, you can become an excellent speaker. And I'm going to prove to you that that's absolutely correct. And this is part of the proof right here. If you say no to this and you say yes to that, then you need to just know that you can become an excellent speaker. It may be difficult. It may take longer than what you like. It may not be in the way that you think, right? So some people have these ways in their minds that they need to learn to become an excellent speaker. There are traditional ways that people go about stopping stuttering and overcoming stuttering. And many of those don't work. So maybe there's a different way, maybe there's a better way. But in fact, you can. So what I want to do is I want to just prove to you right now that you can start speaking what? More smoothly, fluently, and confidently. And you can actually see this taking place in your brain. And I want to just kind of demonstrate to you what this looks like in the brain. In your brain, we have over 100 billion neurons. These are cells. And what these neurons do is they do a lot of different stuff, but one of their primary jobs is to transmit information, signals between the neurons. And these signals, right, signals carry inside of them information. And it tells the different parts of our bodies what to do, how to respond. Okay? So we have certain parts of our brain that is telling my hands and my arms what to do right now. Okay? So the way that these things develop is by learning and by habit. The way that I learn to move my hands, the way that I learn to speak, the way that I learn to do anything, the way that you learn to do anything is by habit, right? By developing habits and by learning, right? Through repetition, through modeling, through being taught, through training. This is the way that you and I learn. Now, watch this. Let's break it down to speech. So there are certain areas in your brain that have to do with speech, that have to do with understanding, with language, with forming messages and words. There are also parts of our brain that send signals to certain muscles in our body, to our mouth, to our jaws, to our tongue, to our lips, to our larynx, to our breathing apparatus, our diaphragm, all that have to do with speech. Okay? And what happens is that for people who stutter, they've developed certain connections in their brain. And these connections, right, these connections between the neurons are sending signals that it's telling you to stutter, to block, to repeat, to get stuck in certain situations, certain times, right? So somehow, be it genetic or not, and pretty much everything is genetic, the person has learned and they've developed habit of speaking a certain way. And if you look in their brain, you could actually see the connections that have to do with speech and, in fact, stuttering speech, disfluent speech. There's these certain memories, certain connections that's already been formed. It's there. You've probably heard the expression that bad habits are hard to break, right? The brain is very, very good at forming connections, very bad at breaking connections. So when we form connections and things begin to become automatic, it's doing it for a certain reason. The brain wants to conserve energy, right? So our brain uses a lot of energy, believe it or not, because it's doing a lot of processing. It's telling us how to breathe, it's telling us how to move and so forth. So a lot of the things that you and I do are automatic, right? They're habitual. Why? The brain doesn't want to use a lot of energy thinking about things like, how do I move my muscle so that I can walk? How do I tie my shoe? How do I turn on the faucet? The brain doesn't want to use conscious processing power to have to do those things. So as quickly as it can, it makes those things habitual, where you don't have to think about it anymore. Does that make sense? It wants to conserve energy, so when it can make it automatic, it doesn't have to use the same processing power to think about it. Okay? Now, watch this. Because that's happened, the brain also conserves and uses that same processing power to do higher order things like making decisions, analyzing things, creating things, and all those kinds of things. So it uses a lot of processing power to do that. It doesn't want to use them to do other things. So what we have to do then is these old connections, the current connections that are there, that say you're going to stutter in certain situations at certain times, we can't break them, we can't undo them. Right? That's why it doesn't work. That's why treating it, that's why trying to fix it, trying to cure it or stop it or overcome it doesn't work. In many cases, in most cases, it doesn't work. What does work is forming new connections, right? That is learning a new way of speaking and building a new habitual way of thinking and speaking. That's what does work. All right, so how does this work? Well, it doesn't work by trying to undo the current one, but it does work by trying to create new connections. So how do we do that? By watching someone who speaks well and studying that person. By practicing speaking well. What does speaking well mean? Well, you break down what speaking well means, and then you practice those specific techniques. I call them proactive speaking techniques. But proactive speaking is not just a way of speaking, it's also a way of thinking. Because when you think, you also form connections. You know that you're in certain situations and something says, oh, I'm going to get stuck on that word. That's a way of thinking. You haven't said anything yet. Your brain just says, you're going to get stuck. Or someone asks you your name and all of a sudden you feel something in your body, right? You start feeling anxious. Well, that's a physical reaction, but it's also psychological. So it's a way of thinking as well. So what we have to do is we have to change our pattern of thinking. What we're really doing, we're not changing it, we're replacing it. We're building a new way of thinking. All right? So we have to build a new way of thinking and a new way of behaving or speaking. So how do we do it? You study someone who speaks well. You study the specific techniques, actions, and behaviors, and then you practice them over and over and over until it becomes automatic. So what's happening when you're practicing it over and over? What's happening is these neurons are sending signals to the appropriate other neurons that have to do with speech, right? And so as you watch someone who speaks well, and as you try to mimic them or model them, your brain starts firing these transmitters between the two neurons, right? So it's firing a transmitter, and the other neuron, the receptors there, pick it up, and you keep doing this, right? You continue to do this until they begin to form a connection. That's basically what learning is your brain is forming connections between neurons that have to do with whatever it is that you're learning. These neurons also are sending signals now to different parts of your body, right? Your mouth, your throat, your diaphragm, okay? All the areas that have to do with speech, physical areas, it's sending signals to those muscles as well. So the more you practice speaking smoothly, fluently, and confidently, the stronger these connections become. Now the old connections are still there. That's why many people who speak well occasionally still stutter, because there's certain situations that may cause them to stutter a little. But because they've changed their thinking and their way of speaking, those are very few and far between. It doesn't impact them in the same way. The connection is not quite as strong as it used to be. It's weakened because it's not being used as much. It's not being fired in the same way, right? So the more you practice speaking well, and the more you use your new style in conversations every day, as well as practicing, right, the stronger these connections become. Now watch this. There's something called myelin, and it's an insulator. And what it does is it insulates, just like this electrical tape, it insulates the connections. So when you actually fire, right, sends signals between these two neurons, that is, let's just call them the speaking neurons, and you keep doing that, then the brain says, okay, we need to conserve energy. We need to make this thing automatic. We need to make it operate as quickly as we possibly can. So we don't really have to think about this anymore, because we're having to think about how to speak, whereas we shouldn't have to do that, right? So it insulates them, because when you insulate something, what does it do? It conserves energy. It keeps the signals in there, and it causes the signals to transmit faster. They say up to 200 miles an hour. Just like high speed or fiber optic cables. So it's transmitting the signals really fast, right? To different parts of your brain and to your muscles, so that it becomes automatically. It becomes very smooth, very fluent, very confident. The more you practice it, the more you use it. The less you practice it, the less you use it, the weaker the signals are. And in fact, if you don't practice speaking smoothly, fluently, and confidently, if you don't practice proactive speaking and proactive thinking, then what you're left with is your current connections, the current way that you speak. Does this make sense? So you've heard me probably talk about the subconscious mind, the self-concept, and that we have a belief about how we speak in certain ways. What I'm doing now is translating this into something that you could physically see happening in the brain. And you can research this in neuroscience, neurogenesis, neuroplasticity, learning theory, right? The development of habits. All of this comes into play when we talk about helping you become an excellent speaker. Because what you're doing is you're learning a new skill, you're learning a new ability, you're forming a new habit. When I'm speaking, I'm not thinking about individual words, right? The words now are being handled by another part of my brain that has actually taken it and made it a habit, right? So I have this area that has all these words and vocabulary and so forth, and I don't really have to think about it. It just comes up at the right time. Now, if I were speaking, for example, in Spanish, I would have to then consciously focus on putting the right words together, and some of them would be wrong, and so I'm going to be using a lot more energy. Brain doesn't like that. The brain wants to conserve energy, wants to be very efficient. So the more I practiced, say, speaking in Spanish, then the sooner it would push that down and make it automatic, make it more habitual, where I no longer had to think about putting sentences and phrases together. Does that make sense? It's the same thing with you, my friends, that if you practice, for example, proactive speaking and proactive thinking, then rather than trying to undo stuttering or treat stuttering or fix stuttering or overcome it, what you're doing is you're now forming new connections. So you're practicing the way you want to speak, forming those new connections, right? Firing those transmitters. And the more you fire them, right, the stronger they get. And then sooner, what starts to happen is that insulator starts to wrap so that then it becomes high speed, then it becomes automatic. Then you're no longer thinking about it. Now, how long does it take for this process? Well, they say the average for forming new habits is about 66 days. 21 days is actually not correct. There's some truth to it in that it can range from studies from 18 days to about 254 days, which is a little over 8 months, depending on the habit. We're talking about speaking now, right? We're talking about developing a new way of speaking. You need to be thinking about the fact that you're going to be upwards around this 254 days. Because if you've been speaking in a disfluent way for years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, guess what? It's probably not going to change overnight. Probably not going to change in 21 days. Does that mean you won't see changes? Absolutely not. In the clients that I work with, we start to see changes in a month or less. We start to see changes. Some of them are major, many of them are small. Usually when we learn and we develop new habits and new skills, we see incremental improvements, incremental changes, and that's the best way to learn. So yeah, you can start to see changes in about a month or so, and then in a couple of months, you really start to see more changes. But usually it's going to take several months before you really have nailed that habit down and you start to see major changes. Does this make sense? So what I wanted to do today, and what I hope I've done in the simplest way that I could, I know I got a little complex because I wanted you to see that there's a lot of complex stuff going on physically in your brain. This isn't all just psychology and subconscious stuff. There's physical things happening in your brain when you're learning to speak well, right? And so it's not a matter of, well, I'm not sure if this is, this might work for someone else, but my subconscious is different. No, your brain is just like everyone else's brain, right? You learn in pretty much the same general basic way. I mean, we all have our preferences in how we learn, but your brain's going to work the same way my brain's going to work, the same way that brain is going to work. And you are going to be able to develop new habits the same way everyone else does. You're going to be able to learn new skills the same way everyone else does. And so, in fact, no matter how severe your stuttering might be or how little you might stutter, you can form a new way of thinking and a new way of speaking. You can do it. This proves it. Now, the only way that this would not work for you is if you simply didn't believe it. You simply says, well, I don't think you know what you're talking about, Michael, so I'm just not going to believe that. Or, well, yeah, it might, other people's brains might work like that, but mine doesn't, right? Or, well, yeah, okay, I believe it, but if it doesn't happen in this amount of time, then it's probably not working for me. So then you have false expectations of when it's supposed to work and how it's supposed to work. Well, yeah, Michael, I believe that. I believe that I can develop habits like that. I believe I can learn new skills, but I'd like to do it this way. I don't want to do it that way. I'd like to try to break this old habit. It's not going to work. Not going to work that way, right? So you can do it. I hope I've just proved to you that you can do it. You're not going to find really anything else that's going to prove to you any more concretely that, in fact, if you don't stutter 100% of the time in 100% of the situations, and if you can learn new skills and abilities, and I'm sure you can, and you can develop new habits, and I'm sure you can, then guess what? In a couple of months, in a few months, in 6 or 7 or 8 months, you can look back and you can see yourself speaking more smoothly, fluently, and confidently. I'm even more convinced of this because when I'm not doing videos, I'm working with clients. Clients from 15 years old, 13 years old, 18 years old, 30, 40, 50 years old. And I'm literally watching them sometimes transform in the conversation, right? Teaching them something that's very natural, not anything strange. Hi, my name is Mike. No, teaching them a natural way of speaking, teaching them things that they can do every day in their own environments, and then watching them day to day, week to week, month to month, because I don't just say, okay, well, here's something, here's 3 weeks, or here's a month, and go at it. I'm with you for 90 days. I watch people transform, and I see them speaking well. I see their lives changing. So I'm 100% convinced that proactive speaking and proactive thinking, that's pro 90D, absolutely convinced that it works. It works 100% of the time. Does that mean that the person is cured of stuttering, to no longer stutter? That's not the point. Remember, the point is not to, we can't disconnect that current way of speaking. What we can do is build a new way of speaking. And as long as these things are true, we can build a new way of speaking. So what you see is that you see yourself speaking more smoothly, more fluently, more confidently, and you see stuttering diminish. And in some cases, it diminishes to the point where it's no longer there. But in other cases, it's still there sometimes, but it's so fast, it doesn't affect you in the same way. You recover so quickly, you barely even notice it, right? The longer you use, the longer you strengthen the new way of speaking, the new connections, the weaker the older ones become. Does that make sense? It's very, very important to shift your thinking about what it is that you're trying to do. Because if you're trying to stop stuttering, let me get rid of stuttering, let me break this old habit, you're going to be very frustrated and you're going to be working on that for the rest of your life. But if you shift your focus to building a new pattern, a new way of speaking, guess what? You're going to see results, and the longer you stick with it, then the more results you're going to get and the faster you're going to get those results. So I hope that I've been able to absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, prove to you, as best I can, prove to you that no matter who you are, no matter how severe or how mild stuttering is, you can learn to speak well. And Pro 90D is probably one of the very best methods and tools to help you do that, right? I'm sure there might be others out there, but I'm sure this is probably one of the best on the market today. So if you're interested in learning more about that, and the very best way to actually do this is through private intensive coaching. That's probably the very best way for you to accomplish this. Why? Because what's happening is you're getting evaluation, you're getting feedback, you're getting accountability, and you're getting encouragement. So this accelerates the process. What I do for people that simply can't afford private intensive coaching is I give them the information in a self-study program. But you have to be highly disciplined to use that program. If you're not disciplined, if you're the type that gives up when you don't see results initially, I don't even want you to buy that program because I don't want you to waste your money and I don't want you to get frustrated. If you are highly disciplined and you can stick with it, then that may be an excellent program for you. But for everyone else, for something like this, the private intensive coaching is most definitely the most effective way to go. So if you're someone out there and you're serious and you need to speak well, it's not just an inconvenience, oh, I stutter and I really like to get over this, but hey, I need to speak well. I need to speak well for my career, for my relationships, for my health, for everything. I'm ready to do this thing. If that's you, then send me an email, get in touch with me, let's set up an appointment, and let's talk about it because this works. There's no doubt about it. Thank you very much for spending this time with me. This is Michael Williams, and I hope to be seeing you soon.